I had never felt more like a disappointment than I did that day, sitting quietly in the austere conference room of my father's law firm in downtown Seattle. At 32, I had always been considered the black sheep of the family, soft-spoken, modest, more interested in my design projects than climbing some invisible social ladder. My sisters, Madison and Harper, flitted through life with confidence and ambition that seemed genetically impossible for me to replicate. Today, their triumph was about to be displayed in stark contrast to my own modest existence. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old leather. I had arrived early, as always, but even the ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, each second hammering into my chest. My mother, Eleanor, had a habit of glancing at me with a mix of disappointment and disbelief, as if my mere presence was a silent indictment of my inadequacies. She sat to one side, immaculate in a tailored suit, with a posture that radiated control. Madison, at 39, exuded poise and a subtle air of entitlement. Harper, younger by 4 years, had the sharp, calculating eyes of someone who measured the world not by human connection but by opportunity. The executor entered, a tall man with a calm demeanor, carrying a folder that seemed innocuous enough, yet I sensed it held a verdict on my worth within the family. The reading of the will began with pleasantries and small acknowledgments of my father's passing, but the air in the room was heavy with unspoken tension. Every sentence I heard tightened a knot in my stomach. When it came time to announce the distributions, the contrast between my sisters and me could not have been more dramatic. Madison received $16 million, her eyes glimmering with a mixture of triumph and expectation. Harper, equally composed, received an identical sum. The room broke into polite applause, though I felt no warmth from any of the faces around me. And then came my portion, a worn, slightly battered briefcase that my father had always carried. There was no money inside, at least none that I could immediately see. I held the case in my hands, feeling its weight not as wealth, but as an emblem of my father's unique intentions. My heart pounded in my chest, not from elation, but from a rush of confusion, disbelief, and a quiet sting of humiliation. My mother's expression was a mixture of disgust and barely concealed anger. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked, her voice edged with condescension. "This is what you left him?" I did not respond immediately. Words seemed inadequate to convey the storm of emotion swirling inside me. I glanced at my sisters, who exchanged smiles that were more performance than affection. Their inheritance had been publicly declared, their wealth guaranteed, while I was left holding a seemingly worthless case. Yet, beneath the surface of my shock, I felt a subtle spark of curiosity. Why would my father orchestrate such an elaborate display? Why this secrecy? Eleanor's voice cut sharply across my thoughts. "You should be ashamed, living like this while your sisters inherit millions." Madison leaned forward, her tone sugary but loaded with judgment. "It's almost embarrassing that you didn't get a proper share." Harper, never one to miss an opportunity, added, "Do you even know what you're supposed to do with that thing?" I set the briefcase down on the table gently, as if laying it on sacred ground. "It's more than it seems," I said quietly. My words were calm, deliberate, though inside, my mind was racing to process the enormity of the moment. My sisters laughed softly, thinking me naive, and my mother's eyes narrowed, trying to discern some hidden deficiency in me that would explain my portion. For a long moment, I simply sat there, absorbing the scene. The public nature of the will reading, the sharp pangs of judgment from the people who should have been closest to me, all collided into a singular realization. My father had left me with something far different from what anyone else expected. The briefcase was not merely an object, it was a challenge, a test, and perhaps, a key to understanding his vision for me. As the formalities concluded, I felt the silent stares of my family burning into my back. I knew they did not understand. They could not see what my father had intended, just as they had never truly seen me. I left the room quietly, the weight of the briefcase grounding me in ways that money alone never could. Outside, the crisp Seattle air was a contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the law office. I clutched the case tighter, sensing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would reveal not just my father's secrets, but my own capacity to navigate a world defined by wealth, values, and hidden purpose. In that moment, I realized that my father's legacy was not measured in millions alone, but in understanding. He had left each of us a mirror, reflecting not what we possessed materially, but what we were capable of recognizing, valuing, and ultimately, becoming. The office was impressive, the kind that made you feel both insignificant and exposed. Dark wood panels lined the walls, interspersed with framed certificates and a few abstract paintings whose colors were too vibrant for the otherwise muted space. The receptionist nodded politely as I entered, her expression neutral, and gestured toward a row of leather chairs. My mother, already seated, glanced at me with a cold, measured expression. "Finally decided to join us?" she asked, her tone slicing through the room with a precision I hadn't anticipated. My sisters, sitting beside her, exchanged small smiles and whispered behind their hands, their attention deliberately avoiding me. I lowered my gaze and muttered an apology, trying to appear composed, though my stomach twisted in a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The lawyer called the room to order, his voice crisp and professional. The papers on his mahogany desk seemed heavier than they were, each envelope and document carrying the weight of years of planning and intention. One by one, he opened the statements. Madison was called first. "Madison, you are to receive $16 million, he announced, his voice steady. She leaned back in her chair, a small triumphant smile appearing as she nodded and accepted the envelope, already counting in her mind the possibilities. My mother's eyes glimmered with approval, and she clapped lightly, though it sounded hollow and performative. Next was Harper. "Harper, you are also to receive $16 million. Her reaction mirrored her sister's, a mixture of delight and the subtle arrogance that seemed to follow her naturally. Again, my mother's approval was visible, and I felt the sharp edge of exclusion cut deeper than any words could have managed. Finally, my name was called. I stepped forward, hands slightly trembling, expecting something, anything, that could match or at least acknowledge the sacrifices, the years of effort, the shared history with my family. Instead, the lawyer slid a small bundle across the desk. It was my father's personal belongings, an old, worn briefcase, some letters, a few mementos from my childhood. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what was, or wasn't, being given. My mother's voice broke the silence, laced with mockery. "Well, isn't that just typical?" she sneered. "While your sisters inherit millions, you're left with nostalgia." Madison let out a laugh, high and unrestrained, while Harper smirked, both clearly enjoying the scene, basking in the apparent injustice meted out at my expense. I felt my cheeks burn and my chest tighten, but I forced myself to kneel, to lift the briefcase, to acknowledge the gesture. My father's handwriting, familiar and precise, adorned the tags on the items. There was a weight to it, a gravity I couldn't yet interpret. I opened the briefcase slightly, just enough to peek inside. It smelled faintly of leather and old paper, an oddly comforting combination. There were letters, a few old photographs, and other small personal effects. None of it could match the figures my sisters had received. None of it could shield me from the laughter or the whispered comments that followed my every movement. "Really? That's all you get?" my mother pressed, her voice sharpening further. "After everything, a few trinkets?" I swallowed hard, holding my tongue. My sisters exchanged looks of amusement, clearly anticipating some kind of emotional collapse or outburst. But I didn't comply. I took the briefcase in my hands, its weight both literal and symbolic, and placed it carefully beside me. The lawyer, maintaining his composure, continued the reading, but there was nothing more assigned to me in terms of monetary inheritance. The sum of $16 million for each sister echoed in my mind repeatedly, the numbers magnified by the contrast to my own allocation, a handful of personal items, a worn briefcase filled with memories, not wealth. The room seemed to shrink, each polished surface reflecting the tension, the unspoken judgments, and the hierarchy of favor established long before the reading began. I kept my focus on the briefcase, on the tangible connection to my father that I still possessed. It wasn't much in the eyes of the world, or my family, but it was mine. I stood there quietly as the session concluded. My mother's expression was one of barely concealed disdain, while my sisters whispered gleefully about the new opportunities their inheritances promised. I felt the weight of the public humiliation, the stark inequity, but I also felt a curious resolve beginning to take shape. Clutching the briefcase as I left the lawyer's office, I realized this moment, this experience, would mark the start of something entirely different. I had been underestimated, overlooked, and perhaps even intentionally excluded. Yet, within the worn leather and faded letters, I sensed the first stirrings of a path uniquely my own, a path that didn't rely on numbers or approval, but on purpose and connection. As the door closed behind me, I understood with clarity, what my father had left was not empty. It was not meaningless. It was a test, a lesson, and a reminder that value isn't always measured in currency, and sometimes, the most significant inheritance comes in forms that only the attentive heart can recognize. I returned to my small apartment, the city lights of Seattle reflecting faintly through my window, and carefully set the old leather briefcase on my worn wooden desk. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, a comforting reminder of simpler times, yet my heart raced with anticipation. I had handled the briefcase countless times in my youth, but tonight it carried a weight I had never imagined. Slowly, I unbuckled the worn leather straps and opened the lid. Inside, the leather smelled faintly of my father, a scent that brought a sharp pang of longing. As I sifted through its contents, one corner of the interior caught my eye, a small, barely noticeable seam. Curiosity piqued, I examined it closely and discovered a hidden compartment. Nestled inside was a single, perfectly preserved business card. Its edges were crisp, and the typeface elegant, Whitmore and Associates, Private Banking, Manhattan. Below the name, a note in my father's familiar handwriting read, "When the time comes, call this number. Trust no one else." My hands trembled slightly. The implications were staggering. Why would my father leave this for me and hide it so carefully? Next, I turned to the small lock on the briefcase itself. It had a combination dial, and I remembered my father's cryptic instructions in his letters years ago. I tried several random sequences, all futile, until I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the numbers, and I recalled the note attached to the briefcase years ago. "Your birthdate is the key." Heart pounding, I entered April 8, 1993, my birthday. A satisfying click echoed softly in the silent apartment. The lock had yielded to the right sequence. Inside, the contents were more personal than I could have anticipated. There were photographs, some from my earliest art exhibits, some candid snapshots from family vacations, each meticulously labeled. Nestled among these were articles from local magazines highlighting my artistic achievements, many of which my family had ignored or belittled. There was a sense of pride emanating from these pages, and I felt an unexpected warmth as I flipped through them. Beneath the photographs and articles were small, personal mementos of my father's life. A well-worn fountain pen, a handwritten letter from years ago, and a few trinkets that had clearly held sentimental value. Each item told a story, revealing a side of my father I had only glimpsed in fleeting moments of conversation. I realized that this briefcase was never meant as a simple inheritance. It was a curated collection of memory, trust, and guidance, a bridge between his world and mine. Sitting back in my chair, I examined each piece with care. The personal items, though modest in value, carried a weight far greater than any sum of money. They reflected the values my father had silently imparted: attention to detail, the pursuit of excellence, and a deep understanding of the importance of personal connection. It was a lesson in legacy, carefully disguised in leather and paper. As I traced the edges of the hidden compartment, my mind began to process the magnitude of the situation. The briefcase was both a key and a map, pointing toward something far larger than the modest sum I had initially perceived. My father had designed this with precision, ensuring that only someone attentive, thoughtful, and patient, qualities he knew I possessed, could uncover its secrets. The discovery filled me with a mix of awe and responsibility. I understood that the briefcase was far more than a relic. It was a test, an initiation into a carefully constructed world of trust, discretion, and careful planning. My heart raced not from excitement alone, but from the weight of the choices ahead. Each photograph, each letter, each article was a reminder of my father's life lessons, crystallized in a tangible form. I spent hours poring over the contents, reluctant to leave even a single item unexamined. The briefcase, once dismissed as trivial by my family, was now a repository of insight into my father's values, his foresight, and his unwavering belief in my judgment. By the time the city outside had gone dark, I had discovered more than just artifacts. I had glimpsed the blueprint of my own path forward. For the first time since the will reading, I felt a quiet confidence. This wasn't merely about what I had been given, but about understanding what it represented. The briefcase contained a message that transcended material wealth, a call to discernment, a charge to act wisely, and a reminder that true value is often hidden, waiting for the observant to uncover it. As I carefully closed the briefcase, locking it once more with the combination of my birthdate, I realized that I was holding far more than my father's possessions. I was holding his trust, and with it, the responsibility to honor his intentions. The room felt both smaller and infinitely larger at the same time, filled with possibility, history, and the silent guidance of a father who had prepared me for this moment in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. I knew then that my next step would be to contact Whitmore and Associates. The card's instructions were clear, and the path forward, though daunting, was now illuminated. With the briefcase secured, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to absorb the significance of what I had discovered. This was no ordinary inheritance. It was the beginning of a journey that would redefine everything I thought I knew about family, wealth, and my own place in the world. The card from the briefcase felt heavier in my hand than it should have, as if it carried a weight far beyond its physical size. I stared at the embossed letters, Whitmore and Associates, Private Banking, Manhattan. My father's precise handwriting beneath read, "When the time comes, call this number. Trust no one else." My fingers trembled as I dialed, unsure whether I was ready for what would come next. A measured, calm voice answered almost immediately. "Whitmore and Associates, how may I assist you?" My throat went dry. This is it. This is what Dad prepared me for. I introduced myself and explained the circumstances of the inheritance. The voice on the other end asked a few confirming questions, requesting the details from the briefcase. I complied, reciting the dates, descriptions, and the serial numbers written in the small notes my father had left. "Excellent," the voice said after a moment of silence. "We will arrange a meeting for you to come in personally. Manhattan, our office. Mr. Whitmore will see you." There was an air of authority in the words, calm yet deliberate, as if every action had been foreseen. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and apprehension. I had imagined wealth before, but never like this. Within a few days, I found myself walking through the marble lobby of Whitmore and Associates' Manhattan office. The space was pristine, modern, yet unpretentious, a testament to serious wealth and meticulous organization. The receptionist greeted me with a polite nod, directing me to an elevator that would take me to the upper floors. Every step felt like a step deeper into a world I had only glimpsed from afar. The elevator doors opened onto a wide corridor lined with dark wood and minimalist art. I approached a large door, behind which I knew Mr. Whitmore was waiting. A soft knock on the polished wood frame, and a voice called from within, "Enter." I stepped in, and the office unfolded before me like a scene I had seen in films, yet it was very real. Bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive desk of dark walnut, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline. Behind the desk sat an elderly gentleman, his hair silver but full, neatly combed, with wire-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. A smile softened the sternness of age and experience. "Ah, at last, you must be the young Mr. Wilson," he said warmly. "I'm Philip Whitmore. It's a pleasure to meet you in person." His handshake was firm, confident despite his years. I sank into the leather chair opposite him, clutching the briefcase from my father like a lifeline. My mind spun with questions, yet the enormity of the moment kept me silent for the first few moments. "I imagine you have questions," Mr. Whitmore began, as if reading my thoughts. "Quite a few," I admitted, and he nodded knowingly. "Before we proceed, I need to verify your identity once more. Protocol, you understand." I handed over my driver's license and the business card from the briefcase. He examined each carefully, nodding with satisfaction. "Excellent. Now, may I call you Ben?" When I nodded, he continued, his voice lowering slightly with gravity, "What I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. Are you prepared for that?" I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "I think so. Your father, though publicly known as a businessman, was far more than he seemed. He was a master investor, quietly building a separate fortune entirely unknown to the family." My stomach twisted at the revelation. "A separate fortune?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. Philip Whitmore pressed a button on his intercom. "Janet, please bring in the Wilson files and portfolio summary." He turned back to me with a gentle smile. "This will take a few minutes to explain properly. Your father and I were close friends from our college days. He confided in me his concerns about how wealth could affect family dynamics. Over the years, he entrusted me with managing a confidential financial identity to protect and grow certain investments, ones that would eventually surpass anything publicly known." The door opened, and the assistant returned with a thick folder marked, "Confidential, Wilson Charles E." Mr. Whitmore handed me several financial statements that reflected astonishing numbers. "The sum you see," he said, pointing to the top line of the main document, "represents your father's private fund. As of yesterday, it totals $358,420,900.55. My mouth went dry. The tablet he handed me confirmed the figure. My hand shook. But why the secrecy? I asked, still trying to process the scale of it. That, he said gently, was the lesson your father wanted to pass on. Wealth, when revealed too early, can change character. He wished to see who would understand value beyond money. That is why he designed the inheritance as he did. You, Ben, have been chosen to oversee this fortune responsibly, with a mission extending to charitable foundations he established, arts, education, conservation, and medical research. The control is now yours. I absorbed the enormity of his words, my mind racing. The briefcase, the hidden compartment, the call to Whitmore and Associates, it all made sense. My father had left me a path, not just wealth. A responsibility. A purpose. Philip Whitmore stood, hands steepled. Take your time to review the materials. My team and I are at your disposal. Everything your father arranged has been structured with discretion and guidance for your success. This is not merely inheritance, it is a legacy. I nodded, still clutching the tablet and folder, feeling the weight of trust, expectation, and opportunity. For the first time, I understood the deliberate care behind every choice my father had made. The journey to understanding the true weight of my father's legacy began the moment I stepped into the office of Whitmore and Associates. The polished marble floors reflected the muted light of the early afternoon, while discreetly dressed staff moved silently along the hallways, each step precise, purposeful. My palms were clammy, gripping the worn leather handle of the briefcase that had once seemed like a relic of insignificance. Philip Whitmore, a man whose age hinted at decades of wisdom, greeted me with a steady, reassuring smile. Ben, I'm glad you came, he said, motioning toward a pair of high-backed chairs in front of an imposing mahogany desk. As I sat, the gravity of the situation settled over me. Every detail in this room screamed of calculated wealth, yet a warmth in his demeanor tempered the formality. Before we begin, he said, we need to review the instructions your father left. My heart pounded at the words, each one drawing me closer to a truth I had not yet dared to imagine. He opened a folder, thick with documents, all neatly organized and stamped confidential. The letter from my father lay atop the stack, its edges worn from careful handling over the years. I recognized his handwriting immediately, deliberate and familiar. Your father designed the briefcase as more than a container of personal items, Whitmore began, his tone measured. It was a test of character. Something to see how you would respond to what appeared meaningless. I nodded slowly, a mix of apprehension and curiosity coursing through me. The memory of my sisters laughing at my inheritance and my mother's thinly veiled scorn resurfaced, making the stakes of this moment feel even higher. Whitmore leaned forward, opening a secure case within the folder to reveal a tablet. The screen displayed the balance of the fund my father had nurtured quietly over 2 decades, $358,420,900.55. I blinked at the figure, unable to fully comprehend the enormity. Each digit seemed both abstract and impossibly real. This, Whitmore said, represents the culmination of your father's private investments and his vision for legacy. You have full control over these resources, but with responsibilities attached. He handed me a sealed envelope marked with my initials. Contained here are specific instructions on managing multiple charitable foundations, one for arts education, another for environmental preservation, and a third supporting medical research. I lifted the envelope with trembling hands, aware that this tangible form held the weight of years of deliberate planning. And, Whitmore continued, there is a condition of confidentiality. Neither your mother nor your sisters are to know of these arrangements. Their involvement, intentionally, was never part of your father's plan. The discretion is essential. As I unfolded the letter inside the envelope, I felt the careful wisdom behind each word. He had anticipated every possible reaction, every potential distraction that might have derailed the purpose of this inheritance. The letter was not just instructions, it was a roadmap for stewardship, an invitation to act with integrity in a world where my family had often equated value with wealth alone. Additionally, Whitmore said, pressing another button on his intercom, there is access to a private safe deposit box at the local bank. Moments later, an assistant entered carrying a small, locked case, which he placed before me. The envelope contained the key. Inside the safe lay items of profound personal significance, photographs from childhood, letters I had written, early artwork my father had preserved, and mementos that chronicled our relationship beyond the realm of money. These were the treasures of his life he entrusted to me, a reflection not just of legacy, but of understanding and trust. I sat there in silence for several minutes, absorbing the reality that had been meticulously prepared for me. The briefcase had been a guide, not an end. The instructions, the fund, and the safe were not mere financial instruments, they were tools to shape impact, to honor the values my father had silently instilled, values of compassion, creativity, and measured judgment. "Do you have any questions?" Whitmore asked gently, his voice drawing me from the reverie. I shook my head, realizing that the enormity of what had been entrusted to me would take time to process. Every aspect of this inheritance was both daunting and inspiring. It was not a gift to squander, but a mission to fulfill. Rising, I placed the letter and the tablet carefully back into the briefcase, feeling for the first time the true significance of what my father had entrusted to me. The test was no longer about recognition of worth, it was about the acceptance of responsibility, the capacity to act with foresight and empathy. I left the office that afternoon with a sense of purpose I had never felt before, aware that the journey ahead would define not just my financial life, but my personal integrity and commitment to a broader legacy. The city beyond the office window stretched vast and indifferent, yet within me, a clarity had emerged. The briefcase, once mocked, had revealed its true nature. My mission was clear: to steward these resources with intention, to honor the quiet wisdom of a father who had understood me far better than anyone else ever had, and to ensure that this secret fortune became a force for meaningful change, unseen and undisturbed by those who would only misuse it. I returned to Seattle with a mind racing, a heart heavy yet buoyed by the knowledge of what lay ahead. The city's familiar skyline, the hum of traffic, the rhythm of everyday life, it all felt different now, framed by the new reality I carried with me. My modest apartment looked smaller somehow, but it was mine, and I allowed myself a moment of relief to simply be home. The weight of the old briefcase had shifted in my hands from confusion to purpose. I carefully unpacked the contents, arranging the photographs, letters, and small personal objects across my work table. Each item told a story, a memory that had been quietly preserved. But it was the envelope and the instructions from Whitmore and Associates that demanded my full attention. They weren't merely reminders of my father, they were a blueprint for action, a call to stewardship over something far larger than I had ever imagined. I resolved immediately to maintain a low profile. My lifestyle would remain unchanged. Friends and neighbors wouldn't suspect anything, and my family certainly wouldn't. It was essential to preserve the secrecy my father had so carefully orchestrated. I wanted to avoid any unnecessary interference or complications, particularly from my mother and sisters. The first test of discretion came sooner than expected. The Westside Community Arts Center, where I had once volunteered and taught weekend classes, was facing closure due to sudden funding cuts. Its teachers were worried, the children demoralized. I made a decision and initiated an anonymous grant of $5,200,000 from the foundation to cover their operational costs and secure scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds. Watching the relief and quiet excitement of the staff, knowing I had done this without anyone outside Whitmore and Associates being aware, was quietly satisfying. Over the following weeks, I established the structure for the larger charitable programs my father had entrusted to me. Scholarships for art education, grants for environmental projects, support for medical research initiatives, all meticulously recorded, all discreetly managed. I scheduled video conferences with Whitmore's team to review investment portfolios, ensure the funds were properly allocated, and learn the procedures for long-term oversight. Each step was deliberate, careful, and in accordance with my father's guidance. Meanwhile, life outside these walls continued as it always had for my family. Social media updates, extravagant purchases, and a casual display of wealth from my sisters and mother flashed across my phone. Olivia's beach house renovation, Harper's designer shopping sprees, my mother's interior projects, it all felt distant, irrelevant. I observed, detached, yet informed, never engaging, never revealing the truth of what I now possessed. My father's warnings echoed in my mind: money reveals character, not changes it. I watched their choices, quietly noting how quickly excess could erode discipline, moderation, and integrity. Despite the luxury at my fingertips, I reminded myself daily that the goal was not indulgence. The inheritance was a responsibility, not a privilege. My father's lesson was clear: The briefcase, the secret accounts, the safe deposit box, it all existed to test character and ensure that the wealth would serve a purpose beyond mere accumulation. Each time I considered a major decision, I thought back to that test, recalling the care and thoughtfulness behind every detail. Within 2 months, the foundation had made its first tangible impact. Children who had previously lacked resources were attending art workshops, receiving materials, and gaining mentorship from experienced professionals. The community center thrived, and local artists began to volunteer in larger numbers, inspired by the sudden stability and newfound opportunities for students. I oversaw it all with a careful hand, maintaining my own work and artistic pursuits while simultaneously guiding the development of the programs. Returning to my studio one evening, I realized how profoundly my life had changed, yet how little it had altered outwardly. The apartment still felt modest, my surroundings familiar, my daily routines largely the same. But beneath that surface, I carried a network of responsibilities, an infrastructure of philanthropy, and the quiet assurance that my father's intentions were being honored. I had found my place, not through the approval of my family, nor through ostentation or public recognition, but through purpose, stewardship, and the affirmation of the values he had instilled in me. Even as my mother and sisters continued their patterns of conspicuous consumption, I remained focused. The knowledge of the secret fund, combined with the lessons contained in the briefcase, gave me clarity. It was not wealth that defined me, it was the action, integrity, and impact that flowed from it. My father had left me not only a fortune but a mission, to protect, to create, and to cultivate good where it was most needed. Every decision I made was now filtered through that understanding. I balanced art projects, foundation oversight, and my personal life carefully, never allowing myself to become complacent or distracted. And through it all, I felt my father's presence in a subtle, guiding way, not as authority, but as a quiet affirmation of trust, confidence, and love. The briefcase had been the key, and I had unlocked the door to something far larger than myself. Seattle had never felt so alive, so rich in opportunity, so brimming with potential. And I was ready. The air was thick with expectation as I arrived at the restaurant where my mother had summoned us for her birthday dinner. I could feel the tension the moment I walked in. My presence was no longer invisible, and every eye seemed to dissect the subtle changes in my posture, my expression, my composure. I had chosen a simple black dress, elegant but understated, deliberately avoiding any hint of ostentation that could fuel their curiosity or suspicion. My mother's gaze flicked toward me the moment I stepped inside. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, her tone carrying a thinly veiled edge of reproach, mingled with a curiosity she could barely conceal. I could see the flicker of surprise on my sisters' faces, Madison, always poised with a hint of arrogance, and Harper, younger but equally entitled, both assessing me with sudden interest. "I thought it was important to be here," I said calmly, offering the first sign of composure I had honed over weeks of preparation and self-reflection. I placed a small, carefully wrapped gift near my mother's plate, a first edition of her favorite poet's work. The gesture was modest, yet meaningful, echoing the lessons I had internalized from my father's carefully orchestrated test. She barely acknowledged it, setting it aside without a glance. "Busy, I see," my mother remarked, her voice artificially sweet, a veneer for the frustration she could not quite hide. Madison leaned forward slightly, eyebrows raised, while Harper's eyes narrowed in subtle calculation. "We've noticed some changes. How are you managing everything?" my mother probed, her hand tracing idle patterns on the edge of the tablecloth. I met her gaze steadily. "I'm managing it responsibly," I replied, careful to maintain a tone both firm and measured. "There are conditions attached to how the funds and assets can be used. They're not for personal indulgence or immediate gratification." There was a momentary pause, the kind that hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations and unasked questions. Madison's lips pressed into a thin line, her posture stiffening. "So, you're saying none of it is accessible to us?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief, as if I were deliberately denying them what they believed was rightfully theirs. "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. "The inheritance isn't for personal use. It comes with responsibilities that I am entrusted to honor. That is not negotiable." Harper let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're serious?" she said, leaning back, arms crossed. "You actually get to decide? After all these years of being overlooked?" I nodded, the weight of my father's instructions pressing against me. guiding every word I spoke. It was never about privilege, I said softly but clearly. It was about trust, integrity, and the proper stewardship of resources. That's what matters now. The table fell silent again. My mother's expression flickered between anger, confusion, and the simmering recognition that her attempts to intimidate me had failed. "But we are your family," she insisted, voice rising slightly, edged with desperation. "We deserve a share." I set my hands on the table, meeting her eyes with calm resolve. "This is not about denying you," I said firmly. "It's about honoring the wishes and principles that guided the distribution. I have a responsibility to follow them, exactly as laid out. That means standing by the instructions without deviation." Madison's voice sharpened, a sting of accusation woven into her words. "So all of this, your sudden independence, your ability to help and control, it's been hidden from us all this time? And now you're turning your back on us?" I shook my head slowly. "I'm not turning my back. I'm respecting the framework that was set up. The money, the assets, and the foundations, these are meant for meaningful use, not entitlement." That was made very clear. For a moment, the room seemed suspended, the air thick with tension. Their reactions, the shocked expressions, the veiled indignation, the fleeting attempts at manipulation, were exactly what my father had foreseen. They did not understand that this test was never about them, but about me, about whether I would uphold the principles entrusted to me. Finally, my mother leaned back, her face settling into the practiced calm of high society composure, though her eyes betrayed a simmering rage. "Then you're really refusing to share?" she asked, voice tight. "Yes," I replied simply. No hesitation, no justification beyond what was already required by the legacy I had been given. The words carried the quiet authority of someone who had understood the full weight of responsibility, someone who had seen beyond material expectations to the deeper values instilled by my father. I rose from the table, leaving the folded napkin neatly in place, my presence a statement in itself. Without further words, I walked toward the exit, leaving behind the flickers of disbelief and frustrated entitlement. They could watch, they could judge, they could even attempt manipulation, but I knew the path I had to follow, and I would not waver. As I stepped into the cool Seattle evening, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose settle over me. For the first time, I fully embraced what my father had intended, not just the management of wealth, but the preservation of values, integrity, and the courage to remain true to myself, regardless of the pressures of family or society. The night air was sharp, invigorating, a reminder that the path ahead was mine alone to navigate, guided by lessons learned and a mission now clearly defined. Returning to the quiet streets of Seattle, I found myself walking past familiar neighborhoods with a sense of unspoken triumph. The Wellington Center for Creative Arts, a name I had chosen carefully, now stood as a beacon of my father's vision and my own quiet determination. I could hardly believe how a single, unassuming portfolio had guided me to this point, a portfolio that seemed empty to the rest of the world but was, in truth, a vessel for opportunity and responsibility. I maintained a simple life, the kind that allowed me to appreciate every detail without distraction. My mornings began early, not with extravagant appointments or social gatherings, but with the hum of the city and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I walked the streets of Seattle, sometimes stopping at small cafes, sometimes passing by art galleries that I had funded anonymously. The anonymity was deliberate, the money was not mine to flaunt, it was meant to serve a purpose far greater than indulgence. I had learned from the portfolio's hidden messages and my father's instructions that influence was quiet, subtle, and enduring. Each day brought its own rhythm, reviewing proposals for artistic programs, approving grants for ecological projects, and carefully monitoring medical initiatives funded through the portfolio. The weight of responsibility was tangible, but it was not burdensome. Unlike my sisters and mother, who had received immediate, flashy wealth, I had inherited a legacy that required patience, discretion, and foresight. My mornings often stretched into late evenings as I examined the reports, letters, and financial statements, ensuring that every dollar was accounted for and every project aligned with the philanthropic intent that had been entrusted to me. Occasionally, I received inquiries from distant relatives or acquaintances curious about the fund, but I always deflected politely, trusting only Whitmore and Associates to handle the communications. Their discretion matched my own, and it was a comfort to know that the portfolio's secrets were as secure as the principles behind them. Every decision I made echoed my father's ethos, The measure of a person is not in what they receive immediately, but in how responsibly they wield the opportunities presented to them. Meanwhile, news occasionally reached me about my sisters and mother. They continued to enjoy their luxurious lifestyles, taking trips abroad, hosting extravagant parties, and living in ways that seemed detached from consequence. Reports suggested that their inheritances, the 16 million each, dwindled faster than expected. It was not a feeling of schadenfreude that came over me, rather, it was a quiet acknowledgement of the contrast between fleeting wealth and enduring purpose. Money, I realized, could be both a blessing and a trap, depending on the intentions guiding it. At the Wellington Center, I observed students and artists immersing themselves in their craft. Paintbrushes moved across canvases, music echoed from rehearsal rooms, and young minds brainstormed ideas that had the potential to change communities. It was here, amid the tangible evidence of creativity and innovation, that I truly understood the value of what my father had left behind. The portfolio, once thought inconsequential, had unlocked a path to something far more meaningful than monetary riches. It had given me the chance to craft a legacy, one that would persist long after my own days. Some evenings, when the offices were empty and the streets hushed, I would sit in my small apartment, the portfolio safely tucked away, and reflect on the journey. From the humiliation at my father's reading, to the secret instructions, to the discovery of the immense fund, each step had reinforced a single truth: the most valuable inheritance is not the sum of dollars received, but the opportunity to shape a life of purpose and integrity. In moments of quiet, I thought of my family, their questions, their demands, and their obliviousness to the work required to steward what they could not comprehend. I did not resent them. Instead, I recognized that their path was different. They had chosen the immediate pleasures of wealth, while I had chosen the long, meticulous, and rewarding path of stewardship. The contrast was sharp, yet it solidified my understanding of what mattered most. The portfolio, now resting on a shelf, no longer seemed a test, but a compass. Through it, I had learned discipline, patience, and the profound impact of thoughtful generosity. The Wellington Center for Creative Arts was the embodiment of that impact, a permanent reminder that legacy is not measured in the flash of opulence, but in the enduring benefit provided to others. And so, my life continued quietly but fully, a life defined not by the envy or judgment of others, but by the tangible difference made in the world. The lessons of the past, the guidance hidden within a simple leather portfolio, had paved the way for a future rich in purpose, creativity, and understated triumph. In the end, the portfolio, which seemed empty to those who judged superficially, had delivered the most valuable inheritance of all: the opportunity to create meaning, to leave a mark, and to live a life aligned with principles far larger than myself.